Now, the UK's so-called independent climate advisors said the government should not loosen its target to cut greenhouse gas emissions and hit their net zero targets. Of course, they said that, but should they? Well, joining us is an economist and political theorist, a professor at Webster University in Vienna, Ralph Schulhammer, once again. Good afternoon to you, Ralph.
Good to see you, Julia.
Good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I'm waiting for you to hold up a Talk TV mug at me, as he often does. I don't know how it got all the way to Vienna, but we're letting that
I'm
go.
hiding it. I don't want anybody to lose their jobs because of me.
Ralph, look, let's talk about this. We often hear about this organisation, the Independent Climate Advisors. This is the Climate Change Committee. A very questionable collection of people who are fully on board with the net zero agenda, huge number of which seem to have financial interests in green energy. Imagine that coincidence. I imagine that happening. And they're basically saying that the government must not lose sort of targets. It's not lose focus on its target and shouldn't loosen their bid to cut greenhouse gas emissions because they say we outperformed in 2018 to 2022 on the legal target. Although this was largely down to the fact that we locked down our economy and completely trashed our economy and our lives. But apparently that's okay because it means we cut our carbon emissions. These people are lunatics, aren't they?
Well, maybe as a different tag today, if we want to cut them some slack, I think the one thing we must understand is that these are advocates and not analysts, right? Yeah. These are NGOs, these are interest groups that advocate for one single goal and ignore everything else. As you just correctly pointed out, ideally, I would say they would suggest that we turn off all industry and all kind of transportation, and then we'll end up at zero emissions and their goal is achieved because they never think about second order consequences. The problem is, and I think you talk about this a lot in your show, is that politicians increasingly start to sound like advocates. But in fact, the obligation of a politician would be to look at the trade-offs. Because let's be completely clear here, you can reduce emissions, but at the current state of technology, you cannot reduce emissions without deindustrialization. And then you have to tell your constituents, you have to tell the people, which goal is more important to you? Which policy do you prefer? Deindustrialization and the reduction of emissions, which, by the way, will not change the global climate, or maintaining industries and thereby a certain level of prosperity, because that's, at the current state of technology, the two things we have to choose between.
And this is it. This is really basic. And it's been very, very obvious for a very long time. And people who had any sense pointed this out a long time ago. But the government and all the opposition parties, with the exception of Reform UK, totally ignore this trade-off. But it's the fact that, look, we are now substantially off target because we've been trying to actually get our economy back on track. But I can remember even during early lockdown, the amount of people going, oh, isn't it wonderful because you haven't got so much pollution and the air's cleaner and there aren't cars on the road, isn't it wonderful? Yes, and the economy is completely trashed and people have no freedom. But the reality is hitting net zero targets, that's not a byproduct of it. It's actually part of the aim. A lot of the people who are pushing this agenda genuinely think that the worst thing that ever happened to the planet is human beings. And the second worst thing was the Industrial Revolution, that we should turn back time, we should stop buying things, having heating, going on holidays abroad, driving cars. They genuinely think that would be good for us. But I'm not sure that most people, whether it's in Austria or the rest of Europe or America or certainly here in Britain, that voters have been asked that direct question and whether they would give the answer that these people want.
No, because I think what the voters are being told, which is, of course, a big lie, is this idea that you can maintain current living standards, but abandon everything that's responsible for those living standards. I mean, this is a very simple calculation. The reason why Britain once was the world's most powerful and richest country is because they got an early start on the Industrial Revolution, as you just mentioned, right? If you have the most productive economy, you're going to end up with the richest people on the planet. This is very simple. And this is currently shifting. And that's the problem, because we tell the people we can become less productive, we can become less industrialized, but we will remain the richest people on the planet. This is not going to work. What we currently do is we live off the, both culturally and of course also economically, we live off the capital of the past. But this capital is going to be depleted at some point. And I think this is what everybody ignores. There is this obsession with the present tense. It's the illusion of the age is the presence. We think how things are now, they're going to be forever. But these things will change first gradually and then suddenly. And I think nobody prepares the people for that.
And we should be. We've just seen that massive change with the invasion of Ukraine and the effect on energy prices and how huge an impact that has had on our economy and our daily lives and our politics, of course. It does have an impact. But it is extraordinary how little there is a debate about it. Now, again, we have controls on what we say here in the UK in broadcasting and Ofcom, which I think is appalling on this particular issue. So as far as they're concerned, climate change is settled science, nothing to discuss. But they're not able to do that about net zero because discussion over the net zero policy is a political and economic debate. So we're able to discuss that. But genuinely, there are complaints made. You're not allowed to discuss this because, you know, everyone agrees on climate change. A, that's not true. But B, what you do about it, even if you think it's a problem, which I don't think it is, but even if you think there's a problem that needs to be solved, that is something that is up for political and economic debate. And we haven't had that. We had a sign-off in this country, we had a sign-off across the European Union on net zero policies without actually spelling out, even though the people who made up these policies do know, even without spelling out to people, this is what it's going to cost.
Yeah, and let me add something. That's exactly what you said, to put it in somewhat more populist terms. There is a huge gap between the diagnosis of what ails us and the proposed solution. So if you get, you go to the doctor and he says you have a cold, and that's a fact, you'll say, okay. And then he says, you know what, Julia, we're going to do chemotherapy. You're probably going to say, whoa, wait a moment. I'm not denying that I have a cold, but I think chemotherapy is a little bit much. Yeah. And this is a little bit how the Western world, approaches the climate issue. There is climate change. I have no problem with this. But does this really mean that out of fear of dying, we have to force our industry to commit suicide? I think that's like describing chemotherapy for a cold.
Absolutely.
There will be change.
Great way of putting it.
But it takes time. Yeah.
Ralph Schulhammer, always so good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Very quick word
Thanks
from
for having me.
Holdsworth on this.
That's a perfect analogy. That's exactly how I would put it. Many people will say, this is happening, but I don't agree with your solutions. It's going to impoverish us.
We need to have the debate. But again, people have not been told what it's going to cost. Telling you, it's going to be a green energy revolution. We're going to be massively rich, loads of extra jobs. It's all going to be fine. No, we're going to be poorer, not be able to go on holiday, own our own cars, be able to buy as much as we want, have heating for our homes, and live the lives we want to live, and not have enough food because energy is a huge part of energy of agriculture production as well. It is extraordinary how dishonest it's been. There we are.